The champagne glass slipped from David's fingers when I slid the financial documents across the mahogany table at the Capitol Grill. His face went ashen as he stared at the revenue reports showing Midnight Rose Designs, 2. $8 million annual income. "This hobby of yours," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You've been lying to me for 7 years." I smiled calmly as his mistress Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Not lying, David. Just finally showing you what happens when you underestimate your wife." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sequined fabric caught the afternoon light streaming through our Cherry Hills Village kitchen window as I carefully folded the sample dress I'd been working on. David would be home from Pinnacle Financial Group within the hour, and I needed to hide every trace of what he dismissively called my little sewing hobby. The irony wasn't lost on me that while he managed other people's millions downtown, I was secretly generating nearly $3 million annually from our converted basement studio. It started innocently enough 7 years ago when Tyler was 7 and Hannah was 4. David's salary at the financial firm was substantial, but Denver's cost of living kept climbing, and maintaining our lifestyle in one of Colorado's most exclusive neighborhoods required careful budgeting. I'd been a marketing director before. The children arrived, but David insisted someone needed to be home full-time. "The Thompsons don't use daycare," he'd declared with that tone that brooked no argument. "What would my colleagues think?" So I became the perfect stay-at-home wife, shuttling between school pickups, PTA meetings, and tennis lessons at the country club. But late at night, after David retreated to his home office for conference calls with New York clients, I found myself sketching dress designs on napkins, dreaming of the career I'd abandoned. Fashion had always been my secret passion, something David viewed as frivolous compared to his serious world of portfolio management and quarterly earnings. The transformation began during a particularly lonely winter, when David's work trips to Chicago became more frequent. He'd return exhausted and distant, claiming the pressure of managing high-net-worth clients was overwhelming. I filled the empty evenings by teaching myself pattern making through online tutorials, converting our rarely used basement into a workspace. What started as therapeutic creativity slowly evolved into something much more ambitious. My first dress was for Hannah's school dance recital. The other mothers noticed immediately. "Rachel, that's absolutely stunning," gushed Patricia Williams, whose husband owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Denver. "Where did you find such a unique piece?" When I mentioned I'd made it myself, the conversation shifted. Suddenly, I was fielding requests for custom work, women willing to pay premium prices for original designs that couldn't be found in conventional boutiques. The business grew organically through word of mouth among Denver's social elite. These women had everything money could buy except exclusivity, and I provided that in spades. My designs were sophisticated yet edgy, perfect for boardroom meetings or charity galas. I specialized in what I called power femininity, clothing that made successful women feel both professional and sensually confident. David remained oblivious to the transformation happening beneath his feet. He saw the occasional delivery boxes and assumed I was indulging in online shopping. When bolts of fabric arrived, I explained them as crafting supplies for the children's school projects. His dismissive attitude actually worked in my favor, creating the perfect cover for my expanding operation. The breakthrough came when Sophia Chen, my college roommate who'd become a successful venture capitalist in San Francisco, visited for Tyler's 10th birthday party. She'd been one of my first clients, commissioning a power suit for a major presentation. The investment had paid off when she secured a $50 million funding round while wearing my design. "Rachel, you're sitting on a gold mine," Sophia whispered as we watched the children play in our backyard. "These pieces could compete with anything coming out of New York or Milan. Have you considered scaling this properly?" The conversation that followed would change everything. Sophia offered to become a silent partner, providing capital and business expertise while I focused on design and production. We established Midnight Rose Designs as a limited liability company, carefully structured to protect both our interests and maintain my anonymity. Sophia's connections in the fashion industry opened doors I never could have accessed alone. Within 18 months, we had exclusive partnerships with boutiques in Aspen, Santa Fe, and Scottsdale, catering to wealthy women who valued uniqueness over brand recognition. The logistics were intricate but manageable. I rented a small warehouse, space in Denver's trendy Rhino district under the company name, installing professional-grade equipment and hiring 2 part-time seamstresses who believed they were working for a small design collective. My schedule revolved around David's predictable routine, dropping the children at school, managing the household, then spending my afternoons at the warehouse overseeing production. The financial arrangements were deliberately complex. Revenue flowed through multiple accounts Sophia managed from California, with my share deposited into a business checking account David knew nothing about. I maintained a separate credit card for all business expenses, ensuring nothing appeared on our joint financial statements. To David, I remained the dutiful wife living off his generous allowance for household expenses. What he didn't realize was that my allowance barely covered groceries while my secret income was steadily accumulating in accounts he couldn't access. The money wasn't just sitting idle either. Sophia had introduced me to investment strategies that were growing our capital faster than David's conservative portfolio management style ever achieved for his clients. The emotional satisfaction was even more significant than the financial success. For the first time since becoming Mrs. David Thompson, I felt like myself again. The creative process energized me in ways I'd forgotten were possible. When clients sent photos of themselves wearing my designs at important events, successfully closing business deals or commanding boardrooms, I experienced a pride that had nothing to do with my husband's achievements or my children's report cards. But maintaining the secret required constant vigilance. I developed elaborate explanations for every aspect of my double life. The warehouse visits became volunteer work at a women's shelter, which David approved of as suitably charitable for a woman of my social standing. The late-night design sessions were disguised as insomnia-induced reading or catching up on household management. I became an expert at hiding financial documents, maintaining separate phone numbers, and scheduling meetings around David's golf games and business dinners. The children remained unaware of the full scope of my activities, though they occasionally helped with simple tasks like organizing buttons or testing fabric textures. They knew Mommy made beautiful clothes, but to them, it seemed like an extension of the sewing they'd seen me do for their school projects. Tyler sometimes joked that I should open a store, unknowingly suggesting something that already existed. The psychological toll of living a double life was considerable, but the empowerment offset the stress. I was building something substantial and meaningful, while David continued to view me as nothing more than an attractive accessory to his professional success. At client events, he'd introduce me with phrases like, "This is Rachel. She keeps our home running smoothly so I can focus on what really matters." His colleagues' wives would smile sympathetically, assuming I was another intelligent woman whose potential had been sacrificed to support her husband's ambitions. If only they knew that while David managed other people's money according to conservative investment principles, I was revolutionizing how successful women dressed for power, building a brand that was beginning to influence fashion trends across the Western United States. My designs were being featured in regional magazines, though always with the company name rather than my personal identity attached. The success bred confidence that extended beyond business. I began carrying myself differently, speaking with more authority even in social situations where David had previously dominated conversations. Other wives noticed the change, commenting on my renewed energy and sophisticated style. Some even asked for fashion advice, unknowingly consulting with the creator of designs they'd admired on mutual friends. David attributed my transformation to what he called finally accepting your role in life. He was pleased that I seemed more content with domestic responsibilities, never suspecting that my satisfaction came from successfully building an empire while maintaining the facade of conventional wifehood. His arrogance created the perfect blind spot that allowed my business to flourish. The financial milestones accumulated steadily. First 100,000 in revenue felt surreal. First million seemed impossible until it wasn't. By year 5, we were approaching 2 million annually, with profit margins that would have impressed David's most sophisticated clients. The business was supporting not just my creative ambitions, but providing financial security I'd never experienced, even during my previous corporate career. Sophia and I discussed expansion possibilities constantly. International markets beckoned, and we had inquiries from buyers in Europe who discovered our designs through American clients. The brand was developing a reputation for sophistication and exclusivity that commanded premium pricing. We were no longer just a regional success story, but a legitimate player in the luxury fashion market. Yet I maintained the careful balance that kept my two worlds separate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At home, I remained the devoted wife and mother David expected, managing social calendars that enhanced his professional standing and maintaining the household that showcased his financial success. The domestic performance was so convincing that David's confidence in his control over our family dynamics continued growing rather than diminishing. The irony was breathtaking. While David prided himself on his financial acumen and ability to identify profitable opportunities, he was completely blind to the most successful venture happening under his own roof. His dismissive attitude toward women's interests and creative pursuits created the perfect camouflage for an operation that was generating returns he could only dream of achieving for his corporate clients. As year 7 approached, I began considering how long I could maintain the dual existence. The business was ready for major expansion, but that would require either bringing David into the secret or making changes that might expose everything. Sophia pushed for taking Midnight Rose Designs national, potentially even pursuing investor interest for international growth. The opportunities were extraordinary, but seizing them would mean abandoning the careful anonymity that had protected us. The decision point was approaching, though I didn't realize how dramatically external events would force my hand. David's behavior had been shifting subtly over recent months, becoming more critical of my appearance and more demanding about social obligations. His Chicago trips were increasing in frequency, and he'd begun questioning my afternoon activities, with suspicious specificity that felt different from his usual dismissive disinterest. Something was changing in the careful equilibrium I'd maintained for 7 years, though I couldn't yet identify the specific threat. The foundation of secrets and lies that supported both my hidden success and our marriage was beginning to show, stress fractures that would soon prove impossible to repair. The first crack in my carefully constructed facade appeared on a Tuesday morning when I discovered David rifling through my desk drawers. I'd come downstairs early to prepare breakfast before heading to the warehouse for a crucial production meeting with our new suppliers from Italy. Instead, I found my husband systematically searching through papers in the kitchen office nook where I handled household correspondence. "Looking for something specific?" I asked, keeping my voice light. Despite the adrenaline surge flooding my system, David straightened abruptly, his face flushing with the embarrassment of being caught in something that felt invasive even within the context of marriage. "The property tax statement," he replied smoothly, though I noticed sweat beading at his hairline. "My accountant needs it for our quarterly review, and I couldn't find it in my files." The explanation was plausible, but David had never personally handled property tax documentation before. That responsibility had always fallen to me as part of managing household finances. I retrieved the document from its proper filing location, watching as David's eyes scanned the other papers visible in the folder. His attention lingered on what appeared to be innocuous receipts and bank statements, but I realized with growing unease that some of those receipts were from my fabric suppliers, carefully mixed among legitimate household expenses to avoid detection. "Thanks," he said, folding the tax statement without looking at it. "I'll be working late again tonight. The Richardson portfolio is requiring more attention than anticipated." The Richardson account had become David's standard explanation for extended absences, though I'd begun noticing inconsistencies in his stories about this supposedly demanding client. After David left for downtown, I conducted my own search through the desk, trying to determine what he'd actually been seeking. Everything appeared undisturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the delicate balance I'd maintained for 7 years. His behavior suggested suspicion rather than the casual dismissiveness that had previously characterized his attitude toward my activities. The paranoia proved justified when I arrived at the warehouse to find Marcus Rivera, the business attorney. Sophia had recommended waiting in the parking lot. His expression was grim as he approached my car, carrying a manila folder that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Rachel, we need to talk," Marcus said without preamble. "Privately, not here." His urgency suggested something more serious than typical business concerns. We drove to a coffee shop in a neighborhood where I was unlikely to encounter anyone. From my social circle, settling into a corner booth where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. Marcus opened the folder to reveal a collection of financial documents that made my stomach clench with recognition. Bank routing numbers, account statements, and transaction records that definitely weren't related to household management or David's legitimate business activities. "A friend at the district attorney's office gave me an unofficial heads up," Marcus explained quietly. "There's an investigation developing around Pinnacle Financial Group. Nothing public yet, but the Financial Crimes Unit has been building a case for months. Your husband's name keeps appearing in connection with some questionable transactions." The documents revealed a pattern of financial manipulation that went far beyond anything I'd imagined David capable of orchestrating. Client funds were being diverted through a network of shell companies, moved between accounts in ways that generated substantial fees while exposing investors to unnecessary risks. The amounts involved were staggering, totaling tens of millions of dollars over a 3-year period. "How does this affect me?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be devastating. Marcus's expression confirmed my worst fears as he pulled out additional paperwork showing connections between David's schemes and our joint financial accounts. "They're going to freeze everything connected to David's finances," Marcus explained. "Joint accounts, shared assets, even funds that technically belong to you if they can't clearly trace the origin. The government casts a wide net in financial fraud cases, and innocent spouses often get caught in the investigation." The implications crashed over me like ice water. 7 years of carefully accumulated business profits could disappear overnight if investigators couldn't distinguish between legitimate earnings and potentially laundered money. Worse, the exposure would inevitably reveal Midnight Rose designs, destroying the anonymity that had been essential to my success. Marcus continued explaining the legal complexities, while I processed the magnitude of the threat facing everything I'd built. The timing couldn't have been worse, as we were in the middle of negotiations for our largest expansion yet, a partnership with luxury department stores that would triple our revenue within 18 months. That deal required clean, financial documentation and transparent ownership structure, neither of which would survive a federal investigation. "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. "The investigation isn't just financial. There are allegations about David's relationship with Vanessa Clark, one of his junior associates. She's cooperating with investigators, providing information about both the financial irregularities and some personal activities that might compromise David's position further." The name meant nothing to me initially, but Marcus's description triggered recognition. Vanessa was the attractive brunette I'd met at several Pinnacle Company events, always impeccably dressed and professionally deferential to David in ways that had seemed appropriately subordinate. I'd never suspected anything inappropriate, but reconsidering their interactions through this new lens revealed subtle intimacies I'd been too trusting to recognize. The personal betrayal stung, but the professional implications were more immediately threatening. If David was facing criminal charges, our divorce would become a public spectacle that would inevitably expose my business activities. High-profile financial crimes cases attracted media attention, and reporters would dig into every aspect of our family's finances, including sources of income that didn't appear in David's tax returns. Marcus advised immediate action to protect my interests. We need to establish clear legal separation between your business activities and David's financial exposure, he explained. That means documenting the legitimate source of every dollar you've earned and creating paper trails that prove your independence from his schemes. The next several hours became a frantic effort to gather 7 years of carefully hidden documentation. Sophia flew in from San Francisco that evening, bringing her own attorney and a forensic accountant who specialized in untangling complex financial arrangements. We worked through the night in Marcus's conference room, reconstructing the complete history of Midnight Rose Designs with the precision required to satisfy federal investigators. The process was exhausting and emotionally draining. Every transaction needed explanation. Every decision required documentation. Every relationship demanded verification. The business I'd built through careful planning and creative passion was being reduced to spreadsheets and legal definitions, stripped of the personal meaning that had made the work fulfilling. By dawn, we'd assembled a comprehensive portfolio proving that Midnight Rose Designs operated independently of David's activities, with legitimate suppliers, genuine customers, and transparent financial relationships. The documentation was impressive, but Marcus warned that surviving the investigation would require more than just clean paperwork. David will fight this, he predicted. When he realizes you've been hiding millions in assets, he'll claim you were complicit in his schemes or that your money came from illegal sources. Financial fraud defendants often try to implicate family members to create reasonable doubt about their own guilt. The strategic implications became clear as Sophia and I discussed our options over breakfast near Marcus's office. We could continue hiding the business, hoping David's legal troubles wouldn't expose our activities, but that approach risked everything if the investigation discovered our connection to the family finances. Alternatively, we could proactively reveal Midnight Rose Designs as part of divorce proceedings, establishing my financial independence before David could claim ownership of assets he'd never known existed. The decision required considering factors beyond just protecting our business interests. Tyler and Hannah would be affected by any scandal surrounding their father, and my choices could either shield them from additional trauma or inadvertently make their situation worse. The children had no idea about either David's financial crimes or my secret empire, living in a carefully maintained bubble of normalcy that was about to burst regardless of my actions. Sophia argued for immediate disclosure combined with aggressive legal protection. "Rachel, you've built something extraordinary here," she said, gesturing toward the documentation we'd assembled. "Don't let David's failures destroy what you've created. This business represents your independence, your future security, and your children's financial protection. Fight for it." Marcus agreed, but emphasized the importance of timing and presentation. "We need to control the narrative," he explained. "File for divorce first, establish your business legitimacy proactively, and position yourself as an innocent spouse who discovered David's activities and took appropriate action. The story matters as much as the facts in situations like this." The legal strategy required careful coordination between divorce proceedings and the criminal investigation. I would need to separate my finances from David's immediately, document my business activities transparently, and cooperate fully with investigators while protecting my own interests. The approach was aggressive but necessary given the complexity of our situation. That afternoon, I met with Helen Park, the divorce attorney Marcus recommended for her experience with high net worth cases involving financial crimes. Helen's reputation was intimidating. She'd represented wives of several prominent Denver businessmen in scandals that had dominated local news. Her track record suggested she could protect my interests even in the most challenging circumstances. "The key is getting ahead of this story," Helen explained during our consultation. "David doesn't know about your business yet, which gives us a significant advantage. We can frame the divorce as your response to discovering his infidelity and financial misconduct, positioning you as the wronged party who's taking control of her future." Helen's strategy involved multiple simultaneous actions: file for divorce, citing adultery and financial misconduct; establish separate legal residence to protect against asset freezing; disclose Midnight Rose designs as premarital intellectual property that had been developed during marriage; seek court protection for business assets that were unrelated to David's criminal activities. The timeline was aggressive, requiring everything to be executed within a week to stay ahead of the criminal investigation's public disclosure. Helen warned that David would likely respond with his own aggressive tactics once he realized the scope of what I'd been hiding from him. "Men like your husband don't accept being outmaneuvered by their wives," she cautioned. "When David discovers you've been financially independent all along, his ego will be as damaged as his legal position. Expect him to fight dirty, making claims about your fitness as a mother, or suggesting you've been hiding assets to defraud him." The personal cost of this escalation was becoming clear as I considered how dramatically our family's life was about to change. Tyler and Hannah would need careful management through the divorce process, especially once David's criminal charges became public knowledge. Their friends' families moved in the same social circles where David's reputation had been built, and the scandal would affect the children's daily experiences at school and in their activities. That evening, I returned home to find David waiting in the kitchen with an expression I'd never seen before. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more calculating. The financial documents Marcus had shown me were spread across the counter, though I couldn't immediately determine how David had obtained copies. "We need to talk," David said, his voice carrying an edge that made me instinctively step back toward the door. "About your afternoon activities, and some interesting financial records that don't match the story you've been telling me for 7 years." The confrontation I'd been preparing for had arrived ahead of schedule, catching me without the legal protections Helen had planned to establish first. David's access to investigation documents suggested he had connections within law enforcement or the prosecutor's office, resources that could complicate our carefully planned strategy. The evening that followed would test everything I'd learned about maintaining composure under pressure, as David's questions revealed that his knowledge of my activities was more extensive than I'd realized. The foundation of secrecy that had protected Midnight Rose designs was crumbling, and the battle for my financial independence was about to begin in earnest. David's fingers drummed against the granite countertop as he studied my face, searching for tells that might reveal the extent of what he'd discovered. The financial documents between us weren't just copies of investigation materials, I realized with growing dread. Some bore letterheads from banks I'd never shared with him, statements from accounts he shouldn't have known existed. Midnight Rose designs, he said slowly, savoring each syllable like expensive wine. Quite the creative name for what appears to be a substantial business operation. Annual revenue approaching $3 million, according to these very interesting tax filings that somehow never made it into our joint returns. My mind raced through possible explanations while maintaining the calm exterior that had served me well during 7 years of deception. David's knowledge was too specific to dismiss as fishing expedition, but revealing the full scope of my activities would hand him ammunition for whatever legal battle was approaching. "I can explain," I began, but David raised his hand with the authoritative gesture he used to silence subordinates at Pinnacle Financial Group. The dismissive motion triggered a flash of anger that I struggled to contain. This was my home, my life, My success he was interrogating with the arrogance of someone who'd never bothered to truly see me. "Oh, I'm certain you can," David replied with a smile that carried no warmth. "But first, let me share what I've learned about my apparently very entrepreneurial wife. Private investigators are remarkably thorough when properly motivated, Rachel. 7 years of careful surveillance can reveal quite a lot about someone's daily activities." The revelation hit like physical blow. 7 years meant David's investigation had begun almost simultaneously with my business launch, suggesting a level of suspicion and calculated surveillance that reframed every interaction we'd shared. Every conversation about my whereabouts, every casual question about my activities, every moment I'd thought I was successfully maintaining my cover had been part of a larger pattern of monitoring and evidence gathering. David pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be a comprehensive collection of photographs. Images of me entering the Rhino warehouse, shots of fabric deliveries being loaded into my car, pictures of meetings with Sophia at various Denver restaurants, even photos of clients leaving my studio carrying garment bags. The documentation was extensive and professionally executed, clearly the work of experienced investigators rather than casual snooping. "The question isn't whether you've been lying to me," David continued, his voice taking on the lecturing tone he used with junior associates. "The question is whether these activities constitute marital assets that should have been disclosed. Or, if we're looking at something more serious, tax evasion, for instance, money laundering, financial fraud designed to hide assets from your husband." The accusations were both absurd and terrifying. My business was completely legitimate, meticulously documented, and transparently operated according to all applicable laws. But David's position at Pinnacle Financial Group had taught him exactly how to weaponize financial complexity against people who couldn't afford to defend themselves properly. His knowledge of regulatory procedures and legal vulnerabilities could turn my success into apparent criminality with the right presentation to the wrong authorities. "You're being ridiculous," I said, finally finding my voice despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Midnight Rose Designs is a legitimate business that I built through my own work and talent. Every transaction is documented. Every client relationship is transparent. Every dollar is accounted for according to proper business practices. David's laugh carried genuine amusement, as if my defense confirmed something he'd already concluded. "Legitimate businesses don't hide from their owners' spouses for 7 years, Rachel. Legitimate entrepreneurs don't create elaborate deceptions to conceal millions of dollars in revenue from their marriage partners. What you've described sounds more like the behavior of someone with something to hide." The gaslighting was masterful, I had to admit. David was reframing my protective secrecy as evidence of criminal intent, transforming my success into apparent guilt through implications rather than facts. His experience manipulating client perceptions in financial services was serving him well in manipulating the truth about our marriage. But something in his performance felt off, too rehearsed and strategic for genuine shock or betrayal. David wasn't just discovering my business activities. He was executing a predetermined plan that suggested his own legal troubles had motivated this confrontation. The timing couldn't be coincidental, coming so soon after Marcus's warning about the federal investigation targeting Pinnacle Financial Group. "What do you want, David?" I asked directly, abandoning any pretense that this was a normal marital discussion. His elaborate presentation and careful documentation suggested he was building toward specific demands rather than simply expressing hurt feelings about my secrecy. "Recognition," he replied immediately, confirming my suspicion that this conversation had been planned and rehearsed. "Colorado is a community property state, which means marital assets are shared regardless of which spouse generated them." Midnight Rose Designs was built during our marriage using our home as your base of operations, supported by my financial stability, and developed while I provided for our family's needs. That makes your business 50% mine under state law. The legal claim was sophisticated and potentially valid, depending on how a court interpreted the relationship between my business activities and our marital resources. David had clearly consulted with attorneys before confronting me, developing arguments that could withstand legal scrutiny, even if they ignored the emotional reality of our relationship. But his confidence suggested he was unaware of the criminal investigation that would soon make his own financial position untenable. David was planning to claim half of my legitimate business earnings while facing potential federal charges for financial fraud. The irony was breathtaking, though not in ways he would appreciate once his own situation became public. "There's something else," David continued, pulling out additional documents that made my blood run cold. "Vanessa has been very helpful in understanding the full scope of your deception. She's reviewed the evidence extensively and agrees that your behavior suggests someone with experience hiding financial activities from authorities." Vanessa's involvement transformed the situation from marital dispute to coordinated attack. David wasn't just claiming my business assets. He was building a criminal case designed to discredit my character and establish grounds for claiming misconduct. The collaboration between my husband and his mistress to destroy my reputation and steal my life's work was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. I realized then that David's affair with Vanessa wasn't just personal betrayal, but professional conspiracy. They had been working together to investigate and undermine me while planning their own future together, using my success to fund their relationship while positioning themselves to claim ownership of everything I'd built. "You have 48 hours to decide," David announced with the authority of someone accustomed to making ultimatums. "Transfer 50% ownership of Midnight Rose Designs to me, along with corresponding control over business operations and financial decisions, or face the consequences of your deceptive behavior in divorce court and family court when we discuss custody arrangements for children whose mother has been living a double life for 7 years." The threat to my relationship with Tyler and Hannah was the cruelest cut of all. David was weaponizing my business success against my role as a mother, suggesting that entrepreneurial achievement somehow disqualified me from parenting. The attack was designed to force compliance through emotional blackmail rather than legal merit. But David's ultimatum revealed the weakness in his position as much as its apparent strength. His demand for immediate decision suggested urgency that didn't align with the patient investigation he claimed to have conducted. Something was forcing his timeline, likely the approaching exposure of his own criminal activities at Pinnacle Financial Group. "I need time to consult with my attorney," I replied, buying space to implement the protective strategies Marcus and Helen had developed. David's expression darkened at the mention of legal representation, confirming that he'd expected to bully me into submission without professional intervention. 24 hours, he countered sharply. "And Rachel, consider carefully what legal representation might uncover about your business practices. Some stones are better left unturned, especially when children's welfare is at stake." The implicit threat was clear. David would use his position and connections to make my life as difficult as possible if I refused to surrender control of my business. His network included law enforcement contacts, financial regulators, and social services officials who could create problems that would take years to resolve, even if I ultimately prevailed. That night, after David retreated to the guest room, with pointed commentary about needing space to consider our family's future, I made a series of phone calls that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of our conflict. Marcus and Helen had anticipated this scenario and prepared contingency plans that could be activated immediately. The first call was to Sophia, who was already in Denver and waiting for my signal. Within an hour, she arrived at our house with a team of attorneys, accountants, and business specialists who transformed our living room into a war room for protecting everything we'd built together. "David's making a classic mistake," Helen observed after reviewing the evidence of his surveillance and demands. "He's assuming you'll respond emotionally rather than strategically. Men like him never expect their wives to have prepared for exactly this scenario." The legal team worked through the night developing a comprehensive response that would not only protect my business interests, but expose David's own vulnerabilities. His affair with Vanessa violated Pinnacle's ethics policies and potentially compromised client relationships. His threats regarding custody were legally groundless and could constitute harassment. Most importantly, his financial irregularities made him unsuitable to claim ownership of legitimate business assets. By dawn, we had assembled a counter-strategy that would shift the balance of power dramatically. Rather than responding defensively to David's demands, I would take offensive action that exposed his own misconduct while establishing my business legitimacy beyond question. The plan required precise timing and careful coordination, but it promised to turn David's weapons against him while protecting everything I'd worked to build. His confidence in controlling the narrative was about to encounter the reality of a woman who had spent 7 years learning to think strategically about complex challenges. Sophia summarized our position as the team prepared to leave. "Rachel, you've been playing defense for 7 years, hiding your success to protect David's ego and maintain family stability. Starting today, you're playing offense, using your achievements to claim the life you deserve." The transformation from secret entrepreneur to public advocate for my own interests would require abandoning the careful anonymity that had protected me, but continuing to hide would only enable David's attempts to steal what I'd created. The time for secrecy was ending, and the time for justice was beginning. When David emerged from the guest room that morning, expecting to find a defeated wife ready to capitulate to his demands, he instead discovered an empty house and a letter from Helen Park informing him that divorce proceedings had been initiated. His attempts to seize control of my business had triggered a legal response that would expose far more than he had bargained for. The battle for Midnight Rose Designs was just beginning, but I was no longer fighting alone or from a position of weakness. 7 years of building something extraordinary had prepared me for the challenge of protecting it, and David's underestimation of my resolve would prove to be his fatal miscalculation. The evidence we'd gathered about his own activities would soon transform him from aggressive prosecutor to desperate defendant, while my business success became the foundation for building a new life, free from his control and manipulation. Confrontation he'd initiated to steal my achievements would ultimately cost him everything he'd taken for granted. The morning after serving David with divorce papers, I found myself standing in Detective Amanda Foster's office at the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, surrounded by evidence boxes that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my husband's activities. Amanda had contacted Helen within hours of our filing, requesting an immediate meeting that suggested the federal investigation was moving faster than anyone had anticipated. "Mrs. Thompson, your timing is remarkable," Amanda said, spreading photographs across her desk that made my stomach clench with recognition. "We've been building this case for 8 months, and suddenly you appear with documentation that fills in gaps we couldn't bridge on our own." The photographs showed David and Vanessa at various locations around Denver, but these weren't casual surveillance shots. They were meeting with individuals whose faces I didn't recognize, but whose expensive cars and discreet behavior suggested criminal rather than legitimate business relationships. The dates on the images corresponded with evenings David had claimed to be working late at Pinnacle Financial Group. Amanda explained that the investigation had begun when a client reported suspicious activity in their investment account. Margaret Chen, a retired school principal, had noticed unauthorized transfers that David's team dismissed as clerical errors. When the discrepancies continued, Margaret hired a private investigator who uncovered patterns suggesting systematic theft rather than administrative mistakes. "Your husband and Ms. Clark developed a sophisticated scheme," Amanda continued, pulling out financial flowcharts that looked like abstract art in their complexity. They identified elderly clients with substantial assets but limited involvement in day-to-day account management. Small amounts were skimmed initially, then larger sums as they refined their methods. The scheme involved creating mirror accounts that mimicked legitimate client portfolios, but diverted a percentage of funds to accounts controlled by David and Vanessa. The stolen money was laundered through a network of shell companies, real estate investments, and cryptocurrency exchanges designed to obscure the paper trail. Over 3 years, they had stolen nearly $12 million from more than 30 clients, but the investigation had revealed something even more disturbing than simple theft. David and Vanessa were part of a larger conspiracy involving several Denver financial firms, all targeting the same demographic of wealthy elderly investors who trusted their advisors implicitly. The coordination suggested organized criminal activity rather than opportunistic fraud. "We need your cooperation," Amanda explained, "but we can also offer protection. Your business documentation proves you had legitimate income sources completely separate from your husband's criminal activities. That independence actually strengthens our case by demonstrating that the family had no financial pressure that might explain or excuse his behavior." Helen had prepared me for this conversation, emphasizing that cooperation with law enforcement would protect both my business interests and my children's future. By establishing myself as an innocent spouse who discovered criminal activity and took appropriate action, I could avoid any suggestion of complicity while positioning myself favorably in divorce proceedings. The protection offer was more substantial than I'd expected. Amanda's team would provide security for me and the children, monitor our communications to prevent intimidation, and coordinate with family court to ensure David's criminal charges were considered in custody decisions. The federal investigation would also examine David's finances comprehensively, likely uncovering additional hidden assets that could be recovered for his victims. "There's something else," Amanda said, hesitating before pulling out a final folder. "We've been monitoring your husband's communications since we obtained warrants 6 weeks ago. Some of his conversations with Ms. Clark specifically mention you and your business activities. The intercepted phone calls and text messages painted a chilling picture of how David and Vanessa had viewed my success. They had discussed my business as a resource to be exploited, planning to force me into partnership arrangements that would give them access to Midnight Rose Design's revenue streams. The conversations revealed their belief that I was too emotionally dependent and financially naive to resist their demands effectively. More disturbing were discussions about custody strategies designed to pressure me into compliance. David and Vanessa had researched family court precedents involving mothers with unconventional work arrangements, identifying arguments they could use to portray my business activities as evidence of parental neglect or deception. "He's been planning this for months," I realized aloud, processing the implications of their calculated approach. The confrontation about my business wasn't spontaneous discovery. It was a carefully orchestrated attack designed to steal everything I'd worked for. Amanda nodded grimly. "Your husband underestimated both your resources and our investigation. He expected to control the narrative by claiming you were hiding assets from him, not realizing that we already knew he was stealing from his clients. His attempt to implicate you actually confirms our case about his character and motivations." "The federal charges against David would be announced within the week," Amanda explained, making our divorce proceedings a matter of public record that would attract significant media attention. Helen had already prepared a comprehensive media strategy designed to protect our family's privacy, while establishing my credibility as both a successful entrepreneur and a responsible mother. "The key is staying ahead of David's counterattacks," Helen advised during our strategy session that afternoon. "He'll try to claim you've been working with investigators to frame him, or that your business success somehow proves you were complicit in his schemes. We need to document your cooperation and establish a timeline that shows you acted immediately upon discovering his criminal activities." The next phase of our plan involved proactive disclosure of Midnight Rose designs to relevant authorities, media contacts, and social networks before David could control how the story was told. Sophia had arranged interviews with fashion industry publications that would position my business as an inspiring success story rather than a hidden asset in a divorce case. Rachel's achievement represents everything we celebrate about American entrepreneurship, Sophia told the Denver Business Journal in an interview that would run alongside the announcement of David's arrest. She identified an underserved market, developed innovative solutions, and built a thriving business while maintaining her commitment to family responsibilities. Her success should be celebrated, not criminalized by a husband who couldn't appreciate her talents. The media strategy was coordinated with legal filings that established my business legitimacy beyond question. Marcus had assembled documentation, showing every aspect of Midnight Rose Design's operations, from initial concept development through current expansion plans. The transparency was comprehensive enough to satisfy any regulatory scrutiny while demonstrating that my activities had been professional and ethical throughout. Meanwhile, Amanda's team was preparing to arrest David at Pinnacle Financial Group in a coordinated operation designed to prevent him from destroying evidence or fleeing jurisdiction. The timing would coincide with similar arrests at other firms involved in the conspiracy, creating a media spectacle that would overshadow any attempts by David to portray himself as a victim of vindictive prosecution. "Your husband's arrogance is his weakness," Amanda observed during our final preparation meeting. "He's so convinced of his intellectual superiority that he's documented his crimes extensively. The evidence we've recovered from his communications includes detailed plans for fraudulent activities, discussions of specific theft amounts, and strategies for avoiding detection. He's essentially provided a confession for every charge we're filing." The personal cost of these revelations was becoming clear as I prepared Tyler and Hannah for the media attention that would inevitably follow their father's arrest. Both children were old enough to understand that something serious was happening, but too young to comprehend the full implications of financial fraud and federal prosecution. "Dad's made some serious mistakes in his business," I explained during a family meeting that felt surreal in its necessity. "There are going to be news stories and probably some difficult conversations with your friends, but I want you to know that none of this changes how much we love you or affects our family's future security." Tyler, at 14, asked direct questions about whether David would go to prison and what that would mean for our family's finances. His maturity was both impressive and heartbreaking, as he struggled to reconcile the father he'd known with the criminal the evidence suggested. Hannah, at 11, was more concerned about practical implications like whether we'd have to move or change schools. Her questions revealed how much stability meant to children who had never questioned their family's security before. "We're going to be fine," I assured them both, hoping my confidence would prove justified as the legal battles intensified. "Actually, we're going to be better than fine, because we won't be living with the stress of Dad's problems anymore." The support network that rallied around us during this period was both surprising and reassuring. Other mothers from the children's schools reached out with offers of help, many sharing their own experiences with divorce and financial uncertainty. The fashion industry contacts Sophia had cultivated over the years provided both emotional support and business opportunities that demonstrated my professional reputation's strength. Most unexpected was the outreach from David's victims once news of the investigation became public. Margaret Chen, the retired principal whose complaints had triggered the federal investigation, called to thank me for cooperating with authorities and to praise my courage in standing up to David's intimidation. "You're helping us get justice," Margaret explained during a conversation that brought me to tears with its sincerity. "Your husband and his partner stole our retirement savings, but your evidence is going to help recover those funds and prevent them from hurting other families." The victim testimonies that emerged during this period painted a devastating picture of how David and Vanessa had exploited trust relationships to steal from vulnerable people. Elderly clients who had relied on David's financial expertise found themselves facing retirement insecurity because of his greed and manipulation. But the investigation also revealed the sophisticated nature of the criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond David and Vanessa's activities. Federal prosecutors were building cases against an entire network of financial professionals who had collaborated to identify and exploit wealthy elderly clients across multiple states. Your cooperation is helping us dismantle a criminal organization that has stolen tens of millions of dollars, Amanda explained during one of our regular briefings. The evidence you've provided about your husband's behavior and financial activities is crucial to understanding how the conspiracy operated and who was involved. The scope of the investigation was attracting national media attention, with financial crime specialists noting the sophisticated methods used to target and exploit elderly investors. Midnight Rose Designs was being positioned as a positive counterpoint to the story, demonstrating legitimate business success achieved through talent and hard work rather than criminal manipulation. As David's arrest date approached, I found myself oscillating between nervous anticipation and calm determination. The man I'd married 15 years earlier was about to be exposed as someone I'd never really known, while the business I'd built in secret was about to become a public symbol of female entrepreneurship and financial independence. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's attempt to steal my success had ultimately led to exposing his own crimes and validating my achievements. His underestimation of my capabilities and resources had proven to be the fatal miscalculation that would cost him everything while securing my family's future. The final preparations were complete, the legal protections were in place, and the media strategy was ready for implementation. All that remained was waiting for federal agents to execute arrest warrants that would transform our private family drama into a public story of justice, accountability, and the triumph of legitimate success over criminal deception. The arrest happened on a crisp October morning while I was reviewing fabric samples for our spring collection at the warehouse. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Foster containing just 2 words. "It's done." Within minutes, local news stations were breaking the story of coordinated arrests across 3 states, targeting what prosecutors called the largest elderly investor fraud scheme in Colorado history. I watched the coverage from my office as federal agents led David from Pinnacle Financial Group in handcuffs, his confident demeanor replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. Vanessa was arrested simultaneously at her apartment, caught trying to delete files from her laptop, despite knowing that investigators had already secured all relevant evidence. The media attention was immediate and intense. Local television stations had footage of David's perp walk within an hour, and by evening, the story had been picked up by national financial news networks. The scale of the fraud, involving over 40 victims and stolen assets exceeding $15 million, made it a significant white-collar crime story that attracted serious investigative reporting. But the narrative that emerged in those first crucial hours was exactly what Helen and our media team had crafted. Rather than focusing solely on David's crimes, reporters highlighted the contrast between his illegal activities and my legitimate business success. Midnight Rose Designs was presented as proof that financial achievement could be earned through talent and hard work rather than theft and deception. The Denver Post's coverage was particularly satisfying. While her husband was stealing millions from elderly investors, Rachel Thompson was quietly building a fashion empire that now generates nearly $3 million annually through legitimate business practices. The contrast between criminal deception and entrepreneurial success couldn't be more stark. Fashion industry publications picked up the story with enthusiasm, celebrating both my business achievements and my courage in cooperating with federal investigators. Vogue's online coverage positioned me as an inspiring example of female entrepreneurship, noting that I had built a successful luxury brand while maintaining family responsibilities and supporting what I believed was my husband's legitimate career. The public response exceeded every expectation our team had developed. Orders for Midnight Rose Designs clothing spiked dramatically as customers sought to support a business owner who had demonstrated integrity under extreme pressure. The publicity that David had intended to use for destroying my reputation was, instead, driving unprecedented demand for my products. Sophia flew in from San Francisco to help manage the sudden surge in business opportunities. Fashion retailers who had previously been unaware of our brand were reaching out with partnership proposals. Magazine editors wanted interviews about balancing entrepreneurship with family responsibilities. Business schools requested case studies about building companies through organic growth rather than external investment. Rachel, you've become the poster child for ethical business practices, Sophia observed during one of our strategy sessions. David's crimes have inadvertently created a platform for promoting everything Midnight Rose Designs represents: quality, integrity, and authentic success. The contrast was being noted by prosecutors as well. Amanda Foster explained that my cooperation and business legitimacy were strengthening their case by demonstrating that David's family had no financial pressures that might excuse his criminal behavior. His theft was motivated by greed rather than necessity, making his actions more legally culpable and morally indefensible. Your husband's defense team is struggling to develop a narrative that explains his behavior, Amanda reported during one of our regular briefings. They can't claim financial desperation when his wife was generating millions through legitimate business activities. They can't suggest family pressure when you were independently successful. His actions appear to be purely criminal in motivation. The divorce proceedings accelerated rapidly once David's criminal charges became public. Helen had anticipated that his legal troubles would create leverage for resolving financial matters quickly, but the speed of his capitulation was still surprising. Faced with mounting legal fees and frozen assets, David agreed to property division, terms that preserved my business interests while providing fair support for the children. He's in no position to make demands about anything, Helen explained as we reviewed the proposed settlement. His criminal charges make him unemployable. In the financial industry, his assets are being seized to compensate victims, and his reputation is destroyed beyond repair. Accepting reasonable divorce terms is his only option for maintaining any relationship with Tyler and Hannah. The custody arrangements reflected the new reality of our situation. David would have supervised visitation rights pending the outcome of his criminal trial, with the children primarily residing with me. The court appointed a guardian ad litem who interviewed both children extensively before recommending that their living arrangements remain stable, given the traumatic nature of their father's public disgrace. Tyler and Hannah were handling the situation with remarkable resilience, supported by school counselors and the therapeutic resources Helen had arranged. Both children expressed anger about their father's lies and crimes, but they also demonstrated relief that the family tensions they'd sensed but couldn't understand were finally being addressed openly. I always knew something was wrong, Tyler confided during one of our family discussions. Dad was always angry about things that didn't make sense, and you seemed sad even when you were trying to be happy. At least now we know the truth about what was really happening. Hannah's response was more practical, focusing on how our new circumstances would affect her daily life. She was particularly excited about the possibility of moving to a smaller house where she could have friends over without worrying about disturbing David's work calls or maintaining the perfect appearance he'd always demanded. The financial recovery exceeded every projection our legal team had developed. David's hidden assets, once identified and seized by federal investigators, were substantial enough to provide full restitution to his victims while leaving significant resources for our family's security. The court-appointed receiver managing David's estate was able to liquidate investments and recover funds that David had believed were permanently hidden. More importantly, the investigation revealed that David had been stealing from our family as well. Funds that should have been invested for the children's education had been diverted to support his criminal activities and personal relationship with Vanessa. The recovery of those assets, combined with my business income, actually improved our family's financial position despite the divorce. You're going to be fine financially, the court-appointed accountant explained during our final review. Better than fine, actually. Your business income alone is sufficient to maintain your current lifestyle. and the recovered assets provide additional security for the children's future needs. The business expansion opportunities that emerged from the media attention were transformative for Midnight Rose Designs. We received partnership offers from major department stores, licensing requests from international retailers, and investment proposals from venture capital firms interested in scaling our operations globally. Sophia and I spent weeks evaluating options that would have been impossible to imagine when we were operating in secrecy. The publicity had created brand recognition that typically required years of marketing investment to achieve. Our challenge shifted from building awareness to managing growth sustainably while maintaining the quality standards that had established our reputation. "This is your moment," Sophia advised as we reviewed expansion proposals. "You've proven your business model works, demonstrated your personal integrity under pressure, and created a brand story that resonates with consumers. The question isn't whether to grow, but how fast you can scale without compromising what makes Midnight Rose Designs special." The decision to accept partnership with Nordstrom for national distribution was particularly satisfying. The luxury retailer's fashion buyers had been following our work for months, and the recent publicity confirmed their assessment that our designs represented the kind of authentic luxury their customers valued. "Rachel Thompson has created something genuinely special," the Nordstrom buyer explained during our partnership announcement. "Her designs combine sophistication with accessibility, creating pieces that help women feel confident and powerful. The integrity she's demonstrated in her personal life reflects the values we see in her business practices." The criminal trial proceedings provided a final chapter to David's downfall that was both satisfying and sobering. Federal prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of systematic theft, documented through the electronic communications David had foolishly preserved. His defense team's attempts to portray him as a victim of circumstances or co-conspirator were undermined by recordings that showed him as the primary architect of the fraud scheme. Vanessa's testimony was particularly damaging to David's case. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she provided detailed accounts of how David had recruited her into criminal activities, manipulated client relationships to facilitate theft, and planned to use my business assets to fund their future together after divorcing me. David Thompson exhibited a pattern of manipulation and deception that extended to every relationship in his life, the prosecutor argued during closing statements. He stole from clients who trusted him, lied to a wife who supported him, and planned to exploit business assets that belonged to someone else. His actions demonstrate a complete absence of moral restraint or personal integrity. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. David was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with restitution, requirements that would claim any future earnings he might generate upon release. The judge's comments during sentencing reflected the court's view that David's crimes were particularly egregious because they targeted vulnerable elderly victims. White-collar criminals often minimize their actions by characterizing them as victimless or technical violations, the judge observed. But Mr. Thompson's thefts had real consequences for real people, threatening the financial security of retirees who had worked their entire lives to build modest nest eggs. His sophistication and professional position made his crimes more serious, not less. The sentence effectively ended any possibility that David would play a meaningful role in Tyler and Hannah's futures. Both children had reached their own conclusions about their father's character during the trial proceedings, and neither expressed interest in maintaining regular contact with him in prison. The personal transformation I experienced during this period was as significant as the business success that attracted public attention. For 15 years, I had defined myself primarily as David's wife and the children's mother, suppressing my own ambitions to support what I believed were family priorities. The revelation of David's true character forced me to confront how much of my identity had been built around supporting someone who had never deserved that sacrifice. "You've reclaimed yourself," Helen observed during our final meeting as attorney and client. "The woman who built Midnight Rose Designs was always there, but she was hidden behind the role you thought you needed to play." David's crimes didn't create your strength. They just forced you to stop hiding it. The therapy sessions that helped me process these changes were both challenging and liberating. Understanding how David's manipulation had shaped my self-perception required confronting uncomfortable truths about the compromises I had made and the dreams I had deferred. But recognizing those patterns also empowered me to make different choices going forward. You spent 15 years making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego, my therapist explained. Learning to take up the space you deserve is going to require practice, but you've already demonstrated that you have the skills and strength to succeed on your own terms. 1 year after David's arrest, I stood in the showroom of our new flagship store in downtown Denver, watching customers examine designs that represented not just my creative vision, but my journey from hidden entrepreneur to public success story. The space was elegant and welcoming, reflecting the values that had always guided Midnight Rose Designs, even when the business operated in secrecy. Tyler and Hannah were with me for the grand opening celebration, both clearly proud of what their mother had accomplished despite the difficult circumstances that had made it possible. They had invited friends from school to see the store, and I watched them explain my designs with knowledge and enthusiasm that suggested they truly understood the significance of what we had built together. "Mom's really talented," Hannah told one of her classmates while showing off an evening gown that would soon appear in a fashion magazine spread. "She makes clothes that help women feel powerful and beautiful at the same time, and she did it all while taking care of us and dealing with Dad's problems." The recognition that my success was inspiring other women became apparent through the letters and emails that arrived regularly from customers and admirers. Women who had hidden their own ambitions or compromised their dreams to support unsupportive partners found encouragement in my story. Entrepreneurs who had struggled with self-doubt or family pressure saw proof that authentic success was possible through persistence and integrity. "Your story gives me hope," wrote one customer from Phoenix. "I've been scared to pursue my own business ideas because my husband doesn't take them seriously. Seeing what you accomplished while dealing with much worse circumstances makes me realize that I owe it to myself to try." The business itself continued growing beyond every projection we had developed. International expansion was proceeding ahead of schedule, with boutiques in London and Paris carrying selected Midnight Rose Designs pieces. Fashion weeks in major cities were requesting our participation, recognizing that our brand represented a meaningful alternative to trends driven by celebrity endorsements or social media hype. "You've created something that transcends fashion," noted a critic from Women's Wear Daily during a recent interview. Midnight Rose Designs represents authenticity in an industry often criticized for superficiality. Your clothes help women project confidence because they're designed by someone who understands the challenges successful women face. As I reflected on the journey from that morning when I discovered David's betrayal to the evening when I celebrated my business success publicly, the transformation seemed both dramatic and inevitable. The woman who had hidden her talents to preserve a marriage built on lies was always the same person who had the strength to expose criminal behavior and build an authentic life. The 7 years of secrecy had been preparation for the moment, when hiding was no longer possible or necessary. Every challenge I had navigated while building Midnight Rose Designs in secret had developed skills that proved essential when defending my achievements against David's attacks and building a new life from the ruins of our marriage. Standing in my showroom, surrounded by the tangible evidence of what I had accomplished through determination and integrity, I finally understood that David's betrayal had been the catalyst for discoveries that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. His attempt to steal my success had ultimately freed me to claim achievements that were entirely my own. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that would have been unimaginable when I was hiding my ambitions in a basement studio. Midnight Rose Designs was no longer a secret empire, but a public platform for demonstrating that authentic success comes from talent, hard work, and unwavering commitment to doing what's right, even when the personal cost is substantial. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.